Of the Environment and Utilities Commission of the City of West Sacramento for June 12th, 2017. It's 6:01 p.m. I am Vice Chair Brendan Leonard, standing in for our chair, who has not yet arrived. Please stand with me and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First order of business, are there any presentations by the public on items not on the agenda? Seeing
Nope.
none. Do we have any commissioner communications? Seeing none. No other presentations, so I move on to consent agenda, item number 2. May I have a motion to approve minutes? Okay, moved by Commissioner Bivens, and second?
I second it.
All right. Item passes. Excuse me. May I have a vote, please? All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm going to abstain. I was absent.
All those opposed? Hearing none, item passes. Moving on to number 3, a regular agenda item, presentation on the proposed update for the City of West Sacramento's water and sewer connection fees by Mr. Paul Blumberg.
Good evening. This is my first time before the commission. I'm Paul Blumberg with the city's Administrative Services Department, and bringing you tonight yet another workshop on the water and sewer master plans. This time we're talking about an update to the connection fees. And so this is really important is new development comes in, folks buy into our system, and the last update for water was in 2005, and for sewer the last update was in 2007, so it's been a while. So as the report outlines for you, there are a number of structural changes we're looking at, so a number of policy issues that we would revisit when we bring back the final recommended connection fees. And so we've got John Farnkoff with HF&H, our consultant, who's going to go through a PowerPoint, and then we can answer any questions you might have. But with that, I'll pass it on to John.
Members of the Commission, good evening. I think it was early April when you saw me for the first time and the last time, or the previous time. At that time, I made a presentation that gave you some background about setting connection fees in California, and we walked through your water and sewer connection fees, just describing them to you. And we also talked about the methodology we propose to use in updating your connection fees. Since that time, there have been 2 presentations to the City Council. We gave them the same presentation about the background and your current fees that you saw. And then there was a second presentation to them talking more about our recommendations on modifications that could be made. And that's the presentation that I have here for you tonight. Since that council presentation, we've had some discussions with city staff, and some of that input, which is not in this presentation right now, I'll also provide to you to just kind of supplement it. So, let me figure this out. Go on. Come on. Oh, I know, it's the wheel.
Yeah, you can.
It's the wheel, so go away. Whoops. Come on.
Here, I'll click for it.
There we go. Whoa, whoa. All right. Presentation outline. We're going to talk about the kinds of costs that are typically recovered in the connection fee. We'll talk about some adjustments that we feel are appropriate in your case. Then we'll talk about your current structure and some modifications that we've discussed with the staff and how that's looking, and then the next steps. So the costs that you would typically see recovered in connection fees for water and sewer are laid out here. On the water side, treatment facilities, all of the pipelines, both the transmission, the larger, as well as the smaller distribution pipelines and hydrants, booster pump stations, storage reservoirs. Those are all things that hold water, but they're not the entire system. In addition to those, we would recommend other capital items, which would be vehicles and equipment, certainly a corporation yard, and any land that's associated with the facilities. On the wastewater side, similar pipelines, lift stations, the large pipe interceptor pipelines, and the collection system. The treatment plant, at one time you did provide treatment services, you no longer do. That's provided by SRCSD, but clearly connection fees should recover those costs, and you collect SRCSD's connection fees on their behalf for them. So that's just kind of the general type of costs that we, in calculating the connection fees, believe that you could recover. And again, our approach, if you'll recall, is we view the connection fee as a form of recovering costs that have been borne by ratepayers at the time that facilities were constructed that provide capacity for growth. So it's a cost recovery approach to setting the connection fees. So the adjustments here to make sure that the cost recovery is fair and that both the city and its ratepayers recover their costs, but that the developers are also protected, the development community is also protected from not having to pay for costs that ratepayers haven't borne. So to begin with, if you fund facilities from borrowed dollars, you wouldn't expect to be recovering the portion of the cost of those facilities that you haven't already paid for. In other words, the outstanding debt is something that we would exclude, but we would include the cumulative debt service, which initially is much less than the full construction cost of the facility, but the ratepayers didn't bear that full construction cost. They only paid the debt service. So in future years, as you update the charge, you would want to continue to accumulate the principal and interest payments that were made in the beginning years. The cumulative debt service is going to be less than the cost of the construction cost, but those financing costs are fairly significant. They're paid by ratepayers. They should be recovered by ratepayers, and over time, the cumulative cost is greater than the actual construction cost of the facility. So it's an important part of the calculation to keep true. Once you build facilities, whether it's from borrowed money, from bonds, or equity on a pay-as-you-go basis, you continue to incur costs associated with those facilities to maintain their capacity. Maintenance, repairs, and even the carrying cost of the funds that ratepayers pay to build those facilities but don't recover until growth finally occurs and connects to those facilities. The easiest way to recover those costs is not to exclude depreciation. And I think I talked to you before about how in valuing a system for sale, you would exclude depreciation, but you're not selling capacity to people when they connect. You are recovering costs that ratepayers are borne, and we want to make sure that those post-construction costs are included in the connection fee. There is contributed capital in-tract facilities. These are facilities that developers typically pay for when they build subdivisions. They only provide capacity for the residents of those subdivisions and for nobody else. And so we have tried to estimate how much in-tract facilities have been paid for by developers. It would not be fair to include the cost of facilities that developers paid for initially in a connection fee that they then pay for. And furthermore, those facilities are not providing capacity for anybody else. Other facilities that are kind of similar to that would be water meters and water services. Those serve individual customers and nobody else, as well as sewer laterals. So we haven't included those. Construction work in progress, again, those facilities aren't completed, they aren't in service, they're not providing capacity. We wouldn't include that, along with any capital reserves. So in doing this, what we're trying to do is be fair to ratepayers to make sure they recover their costs and not double count anything that developers have already paid for. So now talking about structural modifications, first, for the water connection fees, just in going through your charges that you have for the domestic customers, those are charges that are graduated in proportion to the size of the water meter. We wouldn't recommend changing that. We think that's the best way to go. You have an unusual provision. It may go back to a time when there was certain policy related to multiple dwelling units, but there's a separate charge for multiple dwelling units that's on a per dwelling unit basis, and what we would recommend is that you just charge all water connections based on the size of the water meter that they get. And you might find, depending on the size of the apartment, that in some cases they may be paying less per dwelling unit, but what they really are doing is just paying for their capacity. It's the size of that service, and it's a more direct measure of how much capacity they're using than the number of dwelling units, which may or may not be occupied at all times. The commercial fire service connections that you have, there's just one connection. It's equal to a 3/4 inch connection. We think that's fine. We wouldn't change that. Accessory dwelling units. These are dwelling units that provide additional living space, either attached to an existing dwelling or as a separate detached unit. There's a new law this year, and it requires that you, for accessory dwelling units of 1,000 square feet or less, that you prorate your connection fees based either on square footage or the number of fixture units. And this is something that is under review by staff. And then finally, fixture units. Fixture units would be drains that are sewered or other fixtures that supply water to customers. That's a good charge to have because when people come in and remodel, for example, if they just add a bathroom or enlarge a kitchen or something like that, you can charge them for the additional capacity that would require without going to any great pains. It's just a simple matter of defining what the average number of fixture units is per single-family residence, and that can range from 25, 30 fixture units and prorate on that basis. And that kind of ties into how you would handle accessory dwelling units also. You already have a charge per fixture unit on the sewer side, and it'd be a good thing to add here. On the sewer side, you have a fixed charge for single-family connections. It's charged per dwelling unit. There is an assumed value of 235 gallons per day of capacity that goes with that. We think that's a good way to charge single-family connections, but we've been evaluating whether the 235 gallon per day figure is correct, and working with the master plan engineers, we'll recommend what we believe would be appropriate now. Multiple dwelling units are charged looking at the number of bedrooms. For a 3-bedroom multiple dwelling unit, that's equivalent to a single-family dwelling unit, and it's discounted by 10% down to 90% for 2 bedrooms and down to 80% for 1 bedroom. That's unusual. It's more common to see a single charge per dwelling unit that is a fraction of the single-family connection, and what we are recommending here is that you consider piggybacking off of SRCSD, where they use a 75% factor. What you're doing is okay. It could just be simplified a little bit, and you would have the same factor that SRCSD uses, and having a consistent set of factors might make it easier for your staff to work with development. The commercial and industrial charges that you have are charged per 1,000 square feet based on about, I think it's about 10 or 11 land use classes. We were going to make a recommendation that you base the commercial and industrial connection fees on the flow that they have in proportion to the average flow per single-family connection. As it turns out, that's not as easy for your staff to do as we thought it would be, and they would prefer to stick with the current set of classes and charge on a 1,000 square foot basis. They don't act, we were under the impression that they would determine the flow for the connection. the water flow and how much of that was sewered, and that would give them the ability to prorate these charges, and it would be pretty simple, but that is not the case. And so we've been able to come up with charges that are using your same classes. We find that there are significant increases, as it turns out. What you have right now goes back at least to the prior studies that were done. I think it was in 2007. That was at a time when the city also provided treatment. So there are significant percentage increases that are different depending on the class, and that's a combination of probably the fact that strength used to be figured into the sewer connection fees and you don't need to do that anymore, and there may have been some other policy at the time of trying to encourage commercial and industrial growth. So we'll just give you the numbers without any policy, so to speak, and it'll be up to the city to determine how much you want to raise those fees at what rate to get to but not exceed the amount that we recommend. Accessory dwelling units, it's the same here as on the water side. You do have a charge per fixture unit. The city's standard number of fixture units per single-family dwelling is 35. You could probably use that for water also. Here's a comparison of what your current connection fees look like, first for water, compared to some of your neighbors. We haven't updated this since we showed it to the council, but you'll see there that Lincoln on the far right is quite high. The majority of their connection fee is a connection fee capacity charge that they pay Placer County Water Agency. And Folsom and Roseville are also in that boat, and when we checked on their website, they didn't show it, but I sort of knew better and I forgot it. But I believe that Folsom and Roseville are going to be over to the right by the time we correct for that. But you can see right now where your current fee for these water connection fees, how it compares with others. You'll also see that there are a number of different bases for the charge, how they're set, mostly by meter size, but not in all cases. In the far right column there, we just collected the data there on how the charge per multifamily connection compares with the single family. It's not so significant on the water side, but on the sewer side, where we're recommending that you consider a 75% factor, it's more interesting. Here are the sewer connection fees of your neighbor and how you compare with them. I should also mention that some of these, I think Davis at least, Paul was saying, and some of these other cities are in the process of updating their connection fees. So this is the snapshot we had based on information that was available a few weeks ago on websites. Again, there's quite a variety in how the charges are set per unit based on lateral size. Quite a lot of different ways of approaching it, including square footage. So, I don't know, Paul, do you want to, is this still up to date? Our next steps?
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
So as John was saying, we are analyzing the preliminary numbers on what the adjustments will be to the water and sewer fees, and we'll be going back to City Council likely at their July meeting to make our recommendation. And, you know, we're looking at a number of issues. I think we have to be sensitive to new development and the fee structure and what people are paying, obviously. But we also have to look at the issue of full cost recovery. I think that there are some policy objectives. I think I outlined them on my report, that there were certain subsidies provided to quote-unquote infill development, particularly for the sewer fees in the past, and things like that I think we'll be revisiting. There's the accessory dwelling unit issue, which I think we've determined that as long as an accessory dwelling unit isn't adding a water sewer connection, they'll likely be exempt from those fees. It's only if a new line would be added in. So, there are a number of policy considerations that we're still working on, but of course, the bottom line is, what do the numbers look like? And now that we have our preliminary numbers, we're trying to kind of bracket options for the city council for when we make our recommendation. So with that, I think that John and I would be glad to answer any questions you have.
Well, I have a question. How do you define a fixture unit?
John?
The plumbing code does that for us. But for example, I don't remember the exact numbers, but if you have a bathroom with a sink, a toilet, and a shower, that's about 6 fixture units. And a kitchen with, again, with a sink, a dishwasher. I guess that would be, it's 4 to 6 there. So, depending on the size of the house, the number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, you would just add all those fixture units up. The city's 35 fixture units is towards the upper end of what we've seen elsewhere. I've seen, not long ago, we dealt with a sanitary district that actually looked at I think its most recent permitted customers, and I think they came up with an average of 33, but even that's a little bit higher than numbers that we see that I think are usually down in the 20 range.
I was going to say, I was trying to calculate the, whatever, number of drains and sinks in my house, and it's a lot less than 35.
Yeah.
Seems very high.
Okay.
Have you put any numbers to what the increases might look like? Have we seen that yet, or was that, we were just talking about rates before, the last time you came to speak to us, so now you don't have quite a cost? We've done some analysis in the CIP, but not really what that translates to in a per fee increase?
Well, we've submitted preliminary numbers to staff to review. The numbers were, the increases were lower on the water side, on the order of, I believe, about 15 to 20% or thereabouts. On the sewer side, they varied considerably on a percent basis. It was a big number. Dollar-wise, if I recall, the charge per EDU for single family was going from $3,400 to $55. I think it was about a $2,100 increase. So those are significant increases. They are consistent, though, I think, with what you see when you crank the numbers elsewhere. Generally, we're getting numbers that are close to $10,000 on both the water and sewer side. I think the number we're ending up with on the water side is in the low $9,000 range, and that's for treatment as well as transmission distribution. For sewer, because you don't provide treatment, the number is about half that or so. The other half of it, SRCSD's number, is going to get, the total is getting close to in the $9,000 range also, if I recall.
And so two follow-up questions to that. With SRCSD, their rate increases, are they scheduled? And is that something that we plan for with how the fee increases progress after we approve any change? What do we do then? And then second is, are any of these costs contemplated to decommission the existing site?
On the first question, I don't know what the schedule is for SRCSD's increases. You do collect those on their behalf, though, and it will have to get
Sure.
worked into whatever document you use to codify all of that.
Okay.
But I'm sorry, I don't know what they expect. Sorry, I forgot the second question.
Okay.
Okay.
So SRCSD, their connection fees are set completely independent from ours. They have approved increases related to their capital expansion, but we don't necessarily factor that into what we're doing. Yeah.
The point of the question, point of the question for all of our future references is we know that they do this independently, but what will we, if we have to now increase fees to deal with their increase after we've approved a major overhaul here, that it's at least planned for today so that we can just disclose it to the rest of the group, so, I mean, or to the city and our development partners. Just, it's a cost that we don't control. And if it's not accounted for and it keeps creeping up and up and up, and that infringes upon the margin that we thought we'd be able to support the expansion of the system, then it just seems to be one of those unknown variables that we don't have any control over. And if it changes, then we now have to change again at some point in the future.
Yeah, I guess my only response is, what we're looking at when John was talking about where the numbers are coming in, that's if we were to charge full cost recovery in the connection fees. The council certainly would have the option of charging less than full cost recovery. And so that's why we're scrubbing the numbers, and we're going to present options, because we understand that there's a real sensitivity in the development community to that.
Thank you. And that second question was what had to do with demolition of the existing site?
The demolition is about 5% of the total amount, and it's included in the number, so it's about $250 out of a little over $5,000.
So if that development, that presumes a full kind of general plan build-out scenario? That presumes a number of lots or a number of new units that would be coming to the area?
No, it doesn't. It is this connection fee is based on, it's a pure buy-in calculation. So the denominator, if you have the value of the cost that you're recovering as a numerator, the denominator is the projected demand in 5 years.
I was speaking specifically to the 5%, you say, of the overall fee that you're getting per unit, 5% of it would be going towards the decommissioning. I think we've heard here before that the decommissioning would be somewhere to the tune of $10 or $12 million. So we're collecting a fee for something that would have to not be fully funded by the new connection fees.
I think the dollar amount in the model is about $13 to $14 million.
Okay.
And I didn't mean to give you the impression that we thought 5% was about the right amount. It really is based on the current projected demolition costs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question. How much of these fees consider kind of the ongoing operation and maintenance, or if any of these fees? I mean, is there any consideration of that?
Well, they as a matter of law, are not to be used to cover O&M expenses. You're recovering reasonable costs, and it doesn't say reasonable capital or reasonable O&M. It says reasonable costs, and that's what we're looking at here, recovering reasonable costs, and that includes the initial construction cost as well as any subsequent costs associated with maintaining capacity in the system. And those would be the maintenance costs, essentially. When you build those facilities and go on to use them, you don't just maintain the part that you're using. You don't have that choice. You have to maintain the whole system. And so we would not recommend that you exclude depreciation for that reason. You're undervaluing the cost that you should be recovering if you do that.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Yeah, so you mentioned that that you're reevaluating the 235 gallons per day assumed capacity for single-family homes. Is that projected to be higher or lower than your zero reviews proceeding?
We projected it will be lower. SRCSD uses, I think, 310 gallons per day. I don't know if that's a design number or where that comes from. The 235 gallons that was in the 2007 report is identified but not explained. We're not sure where that comes from. What we're seeing in the actual flow that's coming from wastewater customers is just a gradual downward trend due to the penetration of the plumbing code, where you just have to have low flow appliances, and that has made a difference. So the flow goes down, and What that means is for the same size facility, you can provide for more connections.
Everyone good? All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Good night.
Moving on to item 4. This would be the public workshop by the Yellow Habitat Conservancy on the public review draft of the Yellow Habitat Conservation Plan, Natural Community Conservation Plan, and public review of the draft EIR, or EIS.
Good evening, Chairman Leonard and members of the Commission. I'm Charlene Hamilton. I'm the Director of Community Development. It's my honor to introduce this item tonight. I've been working on this as a member of the Advisory Committee to the Yellow Habitat Conservancy for several years. This is a major milestone tonight for it to reach public review draft for both the plan and the EIR EIS. After several years of hard work. The city is a member agency and a permittee under this plan, and so we are fully vested. And this represents a comprehensive mitigation plan, an effort to not only provide timely and known mitigations for the development community, our capital projects, as well as keep our mitigation and our investments within our county. So tonight, we have the Conservancy members, representatives here to present to you. And we have Petrea Marchand and Chris Alford, Heidi Schuden, and their consultant from ICF on the EIR, and they have a PowerPoint for you tonight. So I remain available for questions, but with the chair's permission, I'll turn it over to Petrea.
Please, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Leonard, members of the Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. As Charlene said, I'm Petrea Marchand, and I'm the Executive Director of the Yellow Habitat Conservancy. Just as a little bit of background, because I know I haven't presented to this commission before, the Yellow Habitat Conservancy does consist of all 4 cities and the County of Yolo, as well as UC Davis as an ex officio member. The Joint Powers Agency has been in existence since 2002, and as Charlene said, this is a major milestone because we have been working on the YOLO Habitat Conservation Plan and Natural Community Conservation Plan since 2002 with significant progress in the last 5 years especially. If we are able to complete this draft, we will be within about a year of securing permits. And when we have the presentation ready, I will go through some of the details of the plan, and afterwards we'll be happy to answer questions. The first part of the presentation will be mine, and I will be talking about the Habitat Conservation Plan and Natural Community Conservation Plan itself. And then the second part of the presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Sean Bekta from Ascent Environmental, and he will be giving you an overview of the EIS EIR. So first of all, just as a little background, because I know this may be a new topic for you and not everybody follows habitat conservation plans as diligently as we do at the Yellow Habitat Conservancy. But first and foremost, Habitat Conservation Plan is a permit granted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to local permittees. And in that case, it's the Conservancy, the West Sacramento, and the other cities in Yolo, as well as the County of Yolo, under Section 10 of the Endangered Species Act. So it covers all federal mitigation associated with infrastructure and development activities in the general plans of all 4 cities in the county, so including West Sacramento. So we worked very closely with Director Hamilton and other West Sacramento city staff to ensure that all of the activities that are in the West Sacramento general plan are covered by this permit. And you'll hear later why that's an important change in the way we do permitting in the city of West Sacramento today. A Natural Community Conservation Plan is the state version of that same Endangered Species Act permit. So again, it covers all activities in the city and county general plans. The only difference being that it is granted by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife versus the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In return for these permits, which are 50-year permits under the federal and state Endangered Species Acts, The permittees agree to conserve habitat in perpetuity, consistent with a conservation strategy that has been developed based on biological criteria. So today, as you know, the permitting process under the Endangered Species Act is project by project. This replaces that with a conservation strategy that will preserve habitat for endangered species in perpetuity based on a strategy agreed to by the permittees, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife based on biological criteria. So it's more comprehensive, but it does replace that existing project by project approach to permitting. The primary benefits, and this is the main reason why we've been slogging through this process for the last 15 years, the first is local control. So Director Hamilton's told me a story of a development project in West Sac that was held up because there was an elderberry bush and the permit was stuck on somebody's desk for a year. Well, now if you're not getting granted a permit, you know who to go to, and it's your local agency, and you can yell and scream at them and say, get this permit done. That doesn't work very well at the federal level with a federal agency. I can guarantee you it's going to work a lot better with a local agency that has on its board of directors elected officials from the 4 cities in the county. So local control is one of the primary benefits of this permit. Second, and important to many stakeholders in Yolo County, is that it's increased and improved species conservation. Since the conservation strategy is based on a county-wide approach based on scientific criteria, and you'll see later that we focus on specific areas of the county, we're expecting that the approach to coordinated species conservation is going to be better for the species that this act is trying to protect. And finally, it's streamlined project permitting. There's more reliability and consistency with the permitting process, and I'll describe that a little bit more during the presentation as well. So first of all, our plan area is the entire county of Yolo, and also we have about 1,200 acres in Solano County. And the reason for that is that Pewter Creek is the border between Yolo County and Solano County, and this conservation strategy is going to work with existing organizations to protect habitat along Pewter Creek. The covered activities are shown in orange, includes the West Sacramento General Plan activities. This plan is unusual in that we have such concentrated development in our cities. There is a lot of areas that are obviously not in orange. In other counties, the map does not look like this. This represents about 19,000 of the 653,000 acres. In return for this, for permit coverage for these covered activities, we are going to conserve habitat in these areas. So primarily that is Cache Creek, the Yolo Bypass, and the Sacramento River, and Pewter Creek. There will also be some conservation that occurs between the cities in farmland, that is foraging habitat for Swainson's hawk and white-tailed kite. And we are a model conservation plan in that we're one of the first habitat conservation plans and natural community conservation plans in the state that really focuses on wildlife-friendly agriculture. Many other plans are actually acquiring land in fee title, managing that land in perpetuity. This plan is based almost entirely on purchasing easements from willing landowners and continuing the farming practices that the species that our plan covers have adapted to. So the species that our plan covers generally now are using agricultural land for habitat, and this plan will continue that process, but we'll work with landowners to move that conservation forward to another step to include things like hedgerows or, and also to prevent the conversion of row crops to orchards and vineyards. But it will be one of the first plans in the state that will implement a wildlife-friendly habitat approach. Oops, wrong way. These are the 12 species we cover. Some of them I'm sure you're familiar with, and others are probably less familiar. Most of them are birds. But we also have the western pond turtle, the California tiger salamander, which is found in the Dunnigan Hills, giant garter snake, which is found in the Yolo Bypass and along the Sacramento River. It likes wetlands and rice fields, and the valley elderberry longhorn beetle, which is also present in riparian areas. Palmate bracted bird's-beak is a plant, and that's found in only one location in Yolo County near Woodland. And then the birds, you're probably familiar with them. Swainson's hawk, as you may know, only is here for about 6 months out of the year, but there's about 300 nesting pairs, and it's one of the primary mitigation requirements is mitigation for Swainson's hawk foraging habitat loss. White-tailed kite uses really the same type of habitat as Swainson's hawk, and then we've got western burrowing owl, tricolor blackbird, least bell's vireo, western billed cuckoo, and bank swallow. every one of these species, and I've gotten these questions at other public meetings, is either listed under the Endangered Speak or under the Endangered Species Act, or has the potential to be listed. We did narrow this list from 32 to 12 in the interest of reducing the cost of the plan and also focusing on the species that the member agencies were most likely going to need to mitigate for. But these are the species that we feel will provide the most benefit to the member agencies. I should also mention that the permits that we will be granted as part of this habitat conservation plan provide all of the permittees with what's called the no surprises rule. And that means that over the course of 50 years, if populations of one of these species crashes statewide and they decide to increase the mitigation requirements for that species for individual projects, our mitigation requirements will be locked in to what we've agreed to in this plan. They will not change. So that's one of the primary benefits of these permits, is that type of protection. As I mentioned previously, we've got 19,000 acres of covered activities. These are divided into 4 categories for the spatially defined activities: urban, rural, rural infrastructure, and agricultural economic development and open space. So just as a reminder, we cover not only private projects, but also bridges, roads, flood control facilities. We worked closely with your staff to include future phases of the West Sacramento flood control project. And then we separately also cover what we call not spatially defined activities like operation and maintenance. We have some canal maintenance and some levee maintenance in there, as well as restoration that's needed for our conservation strategy. Similar to the existing approach, where we have where fees are charged for individual projects for Swainson's hawk mitigation or giant garter snake mitigation, this plan will charge a fee. The difference is that this fee covers all 12 species. So if you have just one species, you pay the $11,231 an acre. If you need to mitigate for 12 species, you will pay the $11,231 per acre. The only change in fees is if you are affecting wetlands habitat, which generally means you have to restore habitat somewhere else. Those fees are higher, and those are the wetland fees that you see up there. The lacustrine and riverine, valley foothill riparian, and fresh emergent wetland fees. Like to just give you an example, for right now, if you needed to mitigate for Swainson's hawk, you would pay just the Swainson's hawk fee. If you need to mitigate for Swainson's hawk and giant garter snake, you would pay the Swainson's hawk fee plus purchase mitigation from a giant garter snake mitigation bank. And in this situation, you will just be paying that one fee. So this is an example of the current process for permitting under the Endangered Species Act. And this is a process with which I'm sure you're familiar. You submit your development application to the local planning department. You have 3 agencies that need to weigh in on where and how much you'll need to mitigate for. If one agency gives you information that changes your proposal, then you need to go back to the other agencies and get approval. Sometimes it goes quickly, and sometimes it can take a lot of time. Eventually, you agree on a mitigation approach, and your project's permitted. Under the regional approach with the HCP and CCP, the development application is submitted by the local planning department to the Yellow Habitat Conservancy. As long as the application is filled out correctly and the avoidance and minimization measures are abided by, they pay a fee and their project's permitted. So there is no needing to go back and check with the service or check with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Everything's been agreed to beforehand in terms of what the mitigation will be, and the project should be able to move forward according to other agencies that are implementing it within 2 months of the application being received. And then again, like I said in the beginning, if it's taking too long or you have a special request, you're not asking a federal or state agency for help, you're going to a local agency. From a species perspective, there's also benefits. So right now, with a project-by-project approach, we have the little separate circles, and they're varying different sizes. Developers typically work with local agencies to identify appropriate mitigation, and as soon as a qualified biologist has identified appropriate mitigation, the mitigation is purchased, and you're moving on, and there isn't like a larger conservation strategy that's pulling all of those different pieces together. With the HCP regional approach, We have already agreed to those areas I showed you in that first map on where the conservation should occur. In this case, it's Pewter Creek, Cache Creek, Yola Bypass, and the Sacramento River. So you're going to get larger parcels, and we're also focusing on having those parcels be connected to other protected lands. So you have larger tracts of area where the species habitat will be, the focus will be on species habitat. So what we're agreeing to over 50 years from a conservation perspective is 33,000 acres of, as I said in the beginning, primarily easements on agricultural land. The wildlife agencies did recognize that Yola County has done a lot already to protect habitat in Yola County. We have over 100,000 acres that are either managed or permanently protected for habitat in the county. So they did allow us to count 8,000 of those existing lands towards our permit requirement. That reduces the amount that we need to actually purchase over the 50 years to about 24,000 acres. Those 24,000 acres are broken up into 16,000 acres that will be for mitigation for project impacts, and 8,231 acres for what we call new conservation. Because this is a natural community conservation plan, we do have to go above and beyond mitigation to get that extra no surprises assurances under the Natural Community Conservation Plan rule. So we will have 8,231 acres that are above and beyond mitigation, and I'll go into a little later how we're paying for those acres, because obviously it's not through mitigation fees. And then we also have to restore and create about 956 acres over time, which is a relatively small amount because the activities don't impact a lot of riparian habitat. In terms of the costs, about 48% of the costs of purchasing, the total cost is eye-popping, but it's $371 million. But this is, in comparison, you have to compare that to what the cost would be of mitigating for all the projects in the general plans over 50 years. Obviously, we're not even going to attempt to come up with that cost, but this is the cost of the alternative, which is the HCP and CCP. Mitigation fees will pay for about 48% of that total $371 million cost. Conservation costs are about 36%, and that's the 8,231 acres. And then the wetland restoration and mitigation costs about 16% of the total. Funding, as I mentioned, is from mitigation fees. 64% of it is from mitigation fees. Federal and state funding, so this conservancy will have to very aggressively go after state and federal grants. The good news is that there is dedicated funding at both the state level and the federal level for implementation of habitat conservation plans and natural community conservation plans. And I expect that funding will continue in the near future because it's in almost every single state agency's priority or strategic plan is the implementation of these conservation plans because they are more beneficial to the species than other types of mitigation. Local funding, this is where the West Sacramento has a thank you to say to the City of Davis, the County of Yolo, and Solano County Water Agency. The local funding for this plan, there is a match that's required. Comes from 3 local sources. The first is the City of Davis's open space tax. The second is the county's agreement with the gravel companies to restore Cache Creek. The gravel companies pay into the Cache Creek Resources Management Plan, and the County Board of Supervisors has agreed to partner with the Yola Habitat Conservancy and provide matching funds for projects on Cache Creek. And then finally, there was an agreement with the Solano County Water Agency on Pewter Creek that will provide some additional funding that we will also use as local funding. And then finally, there's a small amount of the total funding from this plan that will come from investment interest. We do have to show as a finding for this permit that we do have the funds to implement the costs. They have to match. So that's why this, we had to do a lot of hard work to identify all the funding sources before we could bring this public review draft out for comment. There are member agency actions that are required and through this process, and these would occur in the fall. First is you have to, the City of West Sacramento would have to consider the EIS-EIR pursuant to CEQA guidelines, make CEQA findings of fact, approve the HCP and CCP, approve the implementing ordinance, approve and execute the implementing agreement, and file a CEQA notice of determination. So as Director Hamilton said in the beginning, the city is a permittee, so you are taking on the obligations along with the Conservancy to implement the permit over 50 years. This is the timeline. So We have released 2 drafts since I took over in 2012. In 2012, I think we were about 20% done with the plan. We're now about 95% done. So as Director Hamilton said, this is a major milestone. We have a 90-day public comment period. It ends August 30th. We're having 9 public meetings. This is the 3rd of the 9. And we will incorporate comments this fall and winter, and then submit the final plan and the final EIS/EIR after we've had member agency hearings and come back to you for approval. And then the wildlife agencies have said they need anywhere from 4 to 6 months to actually issue the permits. So by the summer or fall in 2018, we should be actually at a point where we can implement this new regional approach to Endangered Species Act permitting. And so then I'll stop there and see if you have any questions about the plan, and I'll be turning it over to Sean Beckta to discuss the EIS/EIR, or we can wait until the end and take all questions at the same time.
Does anyone have any questions right now? Seeing none, we'll wait till the end. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Pull it. All right. Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Sean Beckta. I'm with Ascent Environmental. We're an environmental consulting firm. We're contracted with the Conservancy to prepare the EIS/EIR for the HCP. So the HCP is an action by both the CEQA lead agency, the Conservancy, and the NEPA lead agency, the Fish and Wildlife Service. We trigger both CEQA and NEPA. And so we need to prepare the EIS/EIR addressing both laws, assessing the environmental effects. We're under a 3-party contract with the Conservancy and the Fish and Wildlife Service. So we serve both agencies equally as the co-lead agencies for the 2 environmental laws. And so consider both interests when preparing the document and making it legally adequate to cover both NEPA and CEQA. So as Petrea said, there are quite a few meetings going on. She is presenting the HCP, NCCP, and then we're also taking this opportunity to involve the public and interested parties in the NEPA CEQA process. As she said, we have the draft document out on the street at the same time as the HCP, NCCP, and so just like the CEQA process where the draft document, draft EIR goes out, this is a similar process, just covering both NEPA and CEQA. So the plan is to provide an overview of the draft EIS/EIR, and then also to receive comments if there are any, or answer questions on that part of the process. And Petrea will talk after me about some of the mechanisms to provide comments on both the plan and the EIS/EIR. So if you're not familiar with joint documents, there are 2 separate laws, NEPA on the national side, CEQA on the state side. And just like an EIR being a joint document, we evaluate the impacts. It's an informational process to disclose to the public and decision makers the environmental effects of implementing the action, identifying measures to mitigate and reduce significant effects, look at alternatives, and engage the public. As opposed to a lot of projects where the action is actually building something or installing something, in this case the action is accepting a permitting process. From the federal perspective, the action is we are providing or delegating authority to the Yolo Habitat Conservancy to implement this different Endangered Species Act authorization process. Same with the state on the California Endangered Species Act side. So what we're really comparing is the existing Endangered Species Act implementing processes versus this alternative process with an HCP, NCCP. And so we're looking at the mechanisms that authorize take that authorization from Fish and Wildlife Service is what triggers NEPA. The Endangered Species Act is the law. NEPA is the environmental review law that we're complying with so that the Fish and Wildlife Service can implement the Endangered Species Act and hopefully provide the incidental take authorization. Same thing applies to the relationship between the California Endangered Species Act and CEQA. So that permitting process is the trigger for the EIS/EIR. We went through a scoping process earlier. There was an NOI, Notice of Implementation, or Notice of Intent under NEPA, Notice of Preparation under CEQA, scoping process. We're at the draft EIS/EIR stage. As Petrea said, we'll receive comments, provide responses, and put out a final EIS/EIR, and then those agency decision processes will go on. standard format for the EIS, EIR, introduction and executive summary, description of proposed action and alternatives, the environmental analysis. It's a very broad regional plan covering the whole county, not like an individual project where we have a very discrete project area with a very well-defined set of activities. So we are looking at on the programmatic side, more general, and then other required sections. If you're not familiar with NEPA documents, there's some, and you look at the EIS, EIR, there'll be some things that'll be new or different, looking at consistency with executive orders, some other items, and anytime through the process, we can be available to answer questions. So relevant aspects of the plan, the no action, rather than, again, that typical development project where the no action, maybe nothing happens, the existing condition is retained. In this case, the no action is just continuing with the current Endangered Species Act authorization process. So as Petrea talked about, project by project, individual applicants negotiate with Fish and Wildlife Service and CDFW, provide their own mitigation, and then another project goes through the same process with maybe some different staff, and you get separate conservation areas. This is more a programmatic approach where one of the benefits is the more consolidated and better managed conservation area. So the differences in the HCP, NCCP versus the existing condition or the no project is the establishment of that entire reserve system, management activities on that reserve system being implemented by one entity rather than many entities and different preserves for individual projects, public access and recreation in the reserve system, habitat enhancement, restoration, and creation, that 900 and so acres that Petrea talked about, species surveys, monitoring, and research, so what the Conservancy does on the preserves ongoing to manage and monitor them, agricultural activity on the reserve system, so as Petrea said, a big component of this plan is buying habitat conservation easements on ag land that continue agricultural operations on that land, and a neighboring landowner protection program, which is for ag land adjacent to preserves. And so we looked at a standard range of environmental issue areas, pretty much the typical suite of items, one NEPA-specific, socioeconomics and environmental justice. Two of those, we found significant impacts on land use and agricultural and forestry resources. Again, we're looking mostly at the conservation. That's the main difference, and so that's why we're limited on our areas of significant effect. On land use, that was just a point where the Solano County HCP has some areas in Yolo County where there's some water infrastructure that's covered in their plan. Because of the overlap of the two plans, there's some potential for a conflict. Not that we anticipate it happening, but it could, so we identified that in the EIS, EIR, and the mitigation, the gist of it is the Yolo Conservancy talks with Solano and they make sure that both plans are implemented properly without conflict. The agricultural impact is related to the habitat creation. So roughly 702 acres of habitat creation could occur on ag land. Not necessarily all of it will be on that, but we identified a worst case scenario where you could have ag land converted to habitat, and 200 acres of grassland, some of it could be grazing land, could be converted to another habitat that would not be suitable for grazing, like wetlands. Although the plan itself conserves roughly 21,000 acres of ag land in perpetuity through conservation easements, we're in the situation where if you lose ag land to another habitat type, you can't replace it elsewhere, so we called it a significant unavoidable impact under CEQA. We looked at three alternatives. One is the no action alternative. That's primarily a NEPA term, and that, as I said, is continuation of the existing permitting process. A reduced take alternative. We looked at a lot of different options for alternatives and settled in on these two, where we have about 1,335 acres where take would not be permitted on those properties. And then a third alternative where we have some areas, about 1,395 acres, that just wouldn't be covered under the plan. And under everything else on those other two alternatives is pretty much the same, so the same level of conservation area, same covered activities, same mechanism for implementing the plan. all of the action alternatives are superior to the no action alternative. So the whole reason why the Conservancy, the member agencies, the service is to look at a net benefit. No one, I think, goes into this process now with any experience with it without thinking there's got to be a benefit on the other side. And so we verify that with the EIS, EIR. We had all the alternatives turn out better than the no action alternative. There's no difference in the alternatives between the number and type of significant impacts. It's a gradient of impact. And then just in the way that the reduced take alternative is set up, you have less adverse effect on species with the same amount of conservation. That's the mechanism that the Fish and Wildlife Service set up for the alternative that they wanted to see. So it ends up being superior from a biological perspective, although because you have less fees coming in but the same obligation for conservation, financially it may not be feasible. Okay. So I can take questions now on the EIS, EIR, or the NEPA CEQA process, or I can turn it back over to Petrea for the public involvement information.
I just have one. What were the areas, the 1,395 acres under the reduced, I'm sorry, the terminology escapes me at this
Yep,
point. But
no, that's okay.
the excluded property.
Yes.
Where is that?
So for the reduced take alternative, that was in multiple areas around the county. What we did first was we looked at resource hotspots. We looked at areas in the county where our habitat map showed there were multiple species occurring in one area, so basically the most high-value areas from a biological perspective. And then we went around to the local jurisdictions and said, within these hotspots, what are the areas that would be the least adverse to you if we said you could not have take authorized there. You could do other activities, but nothing that would result in take. So that limits what you can do by quite a bit. And so we took that information in and used that to identify these locations.
Do you happen to know if any of that is present here in the city limits?
Yeah,
Sacramento?
so there is one parcel here in the city of West Sacramento that's included in that acreage. Trying to remember. Yeah, we had a discussion about it. I could pull out the document and show you a map and the location of where it's at.
Okay. And while I have you, why aren't Oaks involved in this? Is there something separate with the city and how this is being managed? Oak Tree or Oak?
So I was not involved with preparation of the plan, but being on the periphery, I can take a stab at it, or you want to take it? Okay, so this is really species-based. And so I don't think any of the species are entirely dependent on oaks, like the way the valley elderberry longhorn beetle is dependent on the elderberry shrubs. So oak habitat is included in the plan as far as conservation and restoration, but it doesn't show up in this presentation because it's so species focused. But because oaks are used as nesting habitat for Swainson's hawk and white-tailed kite, they get incorporated into the plan as one of the types of habitats that you want to preserve and or replace.
Thank you.
Did I get that?
I've got one more question for you while we've got you on the EIR.
Yeah.
EIS. Can you talk a little more detail about the land use significant impacts with Solano County, and then also just the status of, I presume there are ongoing discussions with Solano County about developing that agreement and where that's at?
Correct. So the potential for a conflict, we think, is relatively minimal. Thank you. So one of the questions that that Appendix G of the CEQA guidelines asks, which is what we use for our significance criteria, is would the project or activity conflict with a HCP? In one sense, we could have just answered no and said the Solano HCP is not an existing HCP. That's what Appendix G asks for. It's not existing, so there's no conflict. We took the extra step and looked further into it. The way that the Solano HCP comes into Yolo County is really through irrigation and water infrastructure. There's some canals and channels that they include in their covered activities for maintenance and dredging. And so there's some potential that, and like I said, very low, that one of their covered activities may conflict with an area where the YOLO HCP may want to provide conservation, which then could limit what they do. So to minimize that potential, as small as it is, we erred on the conservative, called it a significant impact, and have Petrea and others coordinating with Solano on that to make sure that there's no future conflicts. Okay. Thank you. Oh, yes, so the area under the reduced take alternative in West Sacramento is, it is a corridor, it's along Gregory Avenue. It's a current agricultural parcel, if I remember correctly, that is about 286 acres.
So just quickly, I'll finish up with a little bit more about the public comment opportunities. Oops, there we go. So in terms of providing public comments, like I said, we do have a 90-day public comment period, and it started on June 1st and will end on August 30th. This is the first of 9 meetings, and we've had 2 already, and so we've got 7 more to go. Comments can be submitted in several ways, orally or in writing. So we do have comment cards that we leave at public hearings that people can fill out. They can also find it on our website and fill it out there, email us, send us written comments. And at meetings like this one, we're taking summaries of comments that are provided by the public. And then we have 3 meetings at which there will be a court reporter, June 19th, June 27th, and June 29th. The June 19th meeting is in Woodland. It's the old Habitat Conservancy Board meeting. It starts at 5:30. The June 27th meeting is the Ewell County Board of Supervisors starting at 1 p.m. And the June 29th meeting is at 6:30 p.m. in Davis. And so all 3 of those will have court reporters. So if people would like their comments, directly recorded, we'll be doing it at that time for verbal comments. As I said, we'll only be doing summary comments at the rest of the meetings. So with that, we're happy to take any questions you have.
Anyone? Yes.
I have a question about language access. Are there translators available at these meetings for those who may have limited English proficiency or Spanish-speaking folks, et cetera?
Right now, we do not have translators available. I'll just double check. Yep. So that's a great idea, and I'll discuss it with my staff.
Thank you.
If I don't irritate my fellow board members, may I ask one question about, it's kind of down in the weeds, just with mitigation ratios on properties where there is just habitat, not presence, or possibly even, well, you've already identified some of the habitat areas in the county, but on a project-by-project basis, do you know that level of specificity where someone is going to be triggered or trigger the full additional fee for the various categories versus just for Swainson's hawk or just for tiger salamander?
So essentially, the way the plan works, or the way the permit works, is that we assume presence of species, and you pay the same fee regardless of whether you need to mitigate for 1 or 12. So you get away from this approach where you really don't know how much it's going to cost because you have to, hire all these biologists to determine whether the species is present. Instead, we just take care of that. We just assume presence. You pay the fee. We agree beforehand with how many acres we have to conserve, and we lock in the amount of acres for 50 years. They can't change it, even if the species population crashes. And Heidi might be able to speak in. Oh, yeah, and then, for the wetlands, we obviously, it depends on, if the project impacts that natural community, then it triggers that fee. So you have to, if there's an actual impact on a lake or wetland area, then that fee is triggered, and that's done through surveys of the property that are done by the project proponent.
Interesting. So you assume presence on all of it, but when it does come to the wetlands, there's both a component of preservation and creation, right, for any time you're paying those fees.
Right.
So that, but you said that there's a portion of that isn't covered by the fee, that some creation credits may not be available?
No, if you impact any three of those three categories of habitat, then, and you pay the fee of between 47 and 60,000, then we use that funding to create or restore habitat somewhere else to mitigate for that impact, and the applicant is done with their mitigation obligation.
Okay, thank you.
So unlike, I think now the current process is, I'm not as familiar, is that they have to go out and do it themselves, and instead they pay a fee and we go do it for them.
Right. All right, thank you.
I've got one more. So you mentioned that the list of covered species went from 32 to 12, and that made it a more workable plan, and that makes sense. But presumably for those other 20 species, you may still have to hire a biologist to go out and evaluate the habitat and evaluate the impacts. Are the habitat for those other 20 species that were left out of the plan, are those radically different from the kind of habitat we're talking about here, and so there's less of a risk, or there's still going to be those kinds of predictability problems in terms of costs?
None of the 20 species that we eliminated from the list were listed under the Endangered Species Act. So project applicants would not have to mitigate for those species, and they will not have to mitigate them in their future. They were originally included on the list just in case they got listed during the 50 years, and the board of directors of the Yellow Habitat Conservancy decided that it was not worth the increasing cost to have this additional species on the list that they may or may not need coverage for. If they do end up needing coverage for one of those species in the future, they could petition to amend the plan and add that species, and then they would take on additional conservation obligation as a result of that. But given how long and how time-consuming this plan has been, the board of directors really just wanted to focus on those species the member agencies needed coverage for the most, and take the chance that one of these other species might be listed in the future and they might need to amend the plan.
Thank you. Jennifer, do we need to open a public hearing for this item? Yes. All right. So did we receive any requests to speak on this matter?
There are no requests.
All right. So with that, there will be close the public hearing on that item and move on to item number 5, presentation of the draft age-friendly action plan.
Good evening. My name is John Robinson. I'm Deputy City Manager. Like you said, I'm here to present the age-friendly action plan draft that we've been working on. I'd like to start with a little background on the plan and the process that we've gone through to get here, and then take any questions at the end. So basically, a lot of people are aware, and certainly, many cities are aware, that the population of older adults is growing. There's one SACOG study that said that the population of people over 65 in the Sacramento region is expected to go up by 153% between the year 2000 and 2030. And older adults have the same needs and wants as any of us do, but they might need different means to get there. And a lot of cities across the country and across the world are looking at what they need to do in order to prepare themselves for a population that has those different needs. So the city council, recognized this, and in 2013 they decided to join the AARP Network of Age-Friendly Communities, which is an affiliate of the World Health Organization Healthy Communities effort. The city is one of the first AARP age-friendly communities in California, and we're certainly one of the more active among those. Other cities in this network include Boston, San Francisco, New York, and other cities. The plan, the process is a 5-year process to start off with. We have 2 years to develop a plan. We're nearing the end of those 2 years, so we have this draft that's nearly complete. We're planning to have this to the council in July. And then from that point, we have 3 years to implement the plan, and then there's a process to kind of reevaluate where we are and refresh the plan and continue in the cycle in order to remain in the network. As part of this effort, the council set up a advisory committee that's comprised of, it's chaired by the Mayor Pro Tem Johannesson and Councilmember Sandine, and it has representatives from each of the advisory commissions on it. So Commissioner Bivens is your representative, Commissioner Sheridan is your alternate. So every commission is represented there, and we've been going through a pretty extensive outreach campaign where we've done 2 town hall type meetings, where we did have translators at both of those. We've done, AARP actually sponsored a scientifically valid mail survey of the community. We've also done sort of anecdotal, non-scientific surveys that were done online. We had a phone survey. We did kind of an innovative manual survey where we put a survey instrument on the lunches of Meal on Wheels recipients, and they filled those out, and we collected those. And we've had, by the time the process is done, we think we will have had 11 age-friendly advisory committee meetings, and there'll be 6 commission meetings. We were asked to go to all 6 of the advisory commissions, which may be a first for a city project, I'm not sure. So in looking at that, we estimate that depending on the extent to which people participate in more than one of our survey instruments, we will have contacted between 400 and 700 people, which makes this one of the more inclusive outreach efforts that we've done. So the plan that you have, we have 20 recommendations in here. They span all 8 of the domains that we listed from the AARP and the World Health Organization. So those include outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation, housing, social participation. There's 8 of those. And then the advisory committee also decided to break up the work that we've done into kind of 3 simpler categories, each of which includes several of the World Health Organization domains. So we've got connectivity, which relates both to sort of physical mobility and to broadband access and other forms of connecting people. Public safety, self-explanatory, and then quality of life, which has to do with health, recreation, all the other things that contribute to our quality of life. So you can see in the draft plan, we've tried to delineate which of these groupings each of the recommendations are in. In terms of the work of this commission, item number 6, the broadband access, might be one of the more relevant recommendations that we have in here that you'd want to talk about, but we'd certainly welcome your feedback on any of it. And that's basically my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Just wanted to follow up with you on the logic model issue.
Okay.
Do you remember, if you
I do.
recall from, was that, and did that end up being not terribly helpful, or?
No, we're still, the draft that we're,
Just very quickly, what are you referring to specifically? If you
Yeah,
could
Lydia,
just
if you can
provide
I'm
some
sorry,
backstory
just
for
to
the rest of us.
catch up, as the alternate, I attended a meeting earlier and had, in this review of this plan and how we approach sort of communicating it to the public, a simplified, maybe less government speak might be a little strong, but just a logic model is a way to show the progression of the idea. So if you have your inputs, your outputs, and those are supposed to lead to your outcomes that you intend, and sort of to give a summary, if you will, almost like a dashboard of where the plan goes in a linear way. It's very linear. But of course, this plan is, well, it encompasses quite a few areas, as you just went over. And so whether or not that was even going to work for this plan was still a question that I had, and that's why I'm asking to see where that ended up.
no, the graphics of this are lagging a little bit behind the words. So we've still, that's still in process. I would expect that some form of a logic model will be in the final plan. But we've got the committee, I don't know if you were at the particular meeting, but the committee also recommended that we create a, I'm losing the word now, one of those diagrams, like an infographic. They wanted an infographic that would summarize all the recommendations in the plan. We're still struggling with that also. So there are some graphical elements that we're working on still, but we did take that input, and we're planning to have that in the plan when it goes to the council.
Thank you. And I did not, I had offered to research and try to find something more modern looking, and wasn't able to find anything. Their logic models are really basic.
Right, no, you've got us on the scent. We'll figure it out.
Okay. Thank you.
I had some thoughts. I mean, it's great that the city and staff is actually working on this? Because I think that's more than a lot of cities do. So just kind of looking at this issue and its impact from, seniors. One thing that did actually add a question was, there was, in the survey, there's a discussion about 45 years plus.
Right.
Is that, that seems pretty low. So I don't know, is that a specific number that somebody came up with, or I'm just kind of asking that
Yeah,
question?
AARP used that number for their survey, and, they're not here to speak for themselves. My sense is that they take a pretty expansive view of what's a senior, just because they would like to provide services to as many people as they can, and they would like people to start thinking about the needs of seniors as early as possible. If you look at different definitions that government entities use, you'll see 65 used a lot for, that's kind of a standard. We don't go below 45, but the survey included 45, but that's not the definition that's used throughout. We've tried to stay away from a specific number. So the more commonly 65 and above is considered older, but it varies, and we've tried not to stick with a specific number.
Yeah. And I only say that because it could skew the results ultimately in terms of, but that's just a thought. The thing that I did catch my eye in reading this was there was there are services that are provided. I saw mention of a program that the city provides, a charter service to get seniors to programs. And it kind of mentioned that that wasn't something that was funded, or that there was more demand than
Right.
availability. So I just wanted to call that one out, because the difficulty of which is, you provide these great services and all this various stuff that you're trying to get to, but not being able to get folks there is it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
And sad, so just wanted to call that one out. That one kind of struck me as being one that was critical and just note.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because there is a whole value chain. Like you said, if you have a program, and even if people have the transportation, if they don't know about it because you didn't tell them, or they don't speak the language, or you're advertising on the internet and they don't have internet, then they're not going to come. Or if they do know about it but they don't have the transportation, then they're not going to come. So it's your point is well taken. There's not enough just to have the program. You've got to have the whole value chain to get people knowing about it and getting them to it. So there are recommendations in the plan that get at all those pieces.
And if I may, the note that is made here about the zip code, the Bright Broderick
Right.
area, the recipient of, or the surveys being done. And we had a previous meeting where we discussed our broadband assessment.
Right.
And we have issues of equity here, and I think one of our commissioners brought that up. And we may be highlighting and underlying the city's issues with equity of access to the internet here, that there may be a larger concern that we need to take a closer look at here at the commission and the city too, that we, may be able to address some of these issues if we take a closer look at these survey results, that we are seeing that folks in certain pockets of the city, especially the areas with older infrastructure, are not able to access the internet, or that the speeds are too slow, or it's frustrating to get on at certain times of the day, et cetera. So I appreciate that we're taking a harder look at that issue of access to modern technology here.
Right, yeah, that's super important, and actually, the age-friendly team is partnering with the folks that, I think Mark Zola was already here and probably presented that, but that's going to be, to my knowledge, one of the most ambitious, one-off outreach efforts that's ever been undertaken in terms of going around actually door-to-door in those areas north of the ship channel to get at, what people's actual experiences have been with their broadband infrastructure, so that we can really target what we do effectively. And that information that they generate is going to inform, the implementation of our plan.
Right, and I reside north of the canal, and I can certainly speak to the speed of internet or lack thereof, and compared to the folks that I know here on this commission and otherwise that live south of the canal, and their internet speeds in different. So thank you.
Yeah.
What's going on with the development of affordable housing and fee programs and things of that nature.
That, you know, I probably should have mentioned, when we went to the Planning Commission, it was as if the recommendations in this plan were a flock, and they picked out the weak members of my flock and you know, called attention to them and you know, held them up. And the housing recommendation in here, they pointed out was a little thin. And really, you know, what we're trying to balance being realistic with having a plan that has a meaningful recommendation in it. So, you know, the original recommendation that we had in here was, you know, that we would develop the units at the second phase of the affordable housing complex, the name of which is escaping me, the Delta Lane project. Those are not senior units, but they're units that would be available, affordable units that would be available to seniors. And the Planning Commission thought that was a little thin. Part of the challenge there is that it's, you know, senior units are the most difficult affordable units to create, because by definition they need to be smaller. So, you know, the rents that you can achieve are lower, so you need a bigger subsidy. And this is all happening, you know, in the context of, you know, a situation where the federal government is looking at cutting, not increasing, the very funding sources that we rely upon to develop those units. So it's a challenging environment to set, you know, a new goal. But what we did come up with is, for the next housing element, to try and set a target and do an actual analysis of what the needs are, and set a target to try and hit 4 actual seniors-only subsidized, you know, affordable housing. So to just take a little more aggressive attempt than we have in the past in terms of planning those. But, you know, it's apparently not feasible to make the next phase of Delta Lane seniors only, because it creates too big a gap. It creates an unbridgeable gap in terms of the subsidy that would be required.
What about senior housing that isn't designated as affordable or subsidized?
Yeah, well, I mean, the market can always produce that. I mean, I think that it's part of what that analysis would tell us is what people want and what they need. I mean, we know certain things. We know that almost all seniors would prefer to age in place rather than move, you know, somewhere else. But it was really interesting in the open-ended questions that we did on the phone survey and on the online survey. Several people pointed out, you know, hey, I'd like a Dell Web. Why don't you guys get a Dell Web type development in here, where it's not any kind of subsidy at all. In fact, it's like almost a luxury product that they're looking for, but just kind of with less noise maybe, or more amenities. So I think there is interest in those things, and that's something that could be addressed kind of through our zoning. But in terms of, you know, I guess it was my own, you know, sort of bias. The assumption was that the need would be more focused on affordable, and that's kind of where the recommendation is now.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much for the
Thanks for having me.
presentation. All right, moving on to General Administration, Part 3, the Environment and Utilities Calendar.
The next meeting of the Environment and Utilities Commission is Monday, August 14th.
Any reports from city staff? Excuse me.
Yes, Paulina, Environmental Services Manager. I wanted to just update you all on the council action that was taken in April. We presented to you the Joint Powers Authority for the Yolo Subbasin Groundwater Agency, and the council did authorize execution of that. That board will have its first meeting on, I believe, June 19th. So this Wednesday, the council will appoint the members to that board, and they'll be meeting next week to start the process of setting up their agency and dialing in some of the different housekeeping issues, and then get started on the plan this next year or so. And the other thing I wanted to alert you to is the city has received the amendment letter. There was a trash amendment to the city's stormwater permit, the small MS4 permit, that will require the city to make a decision, either choosing track 1 or track 2 for compliance with this amendment. And just in basic terms, track 1 is installation of full trash capture units at all the priority areas in the city, and track 2 is a combination of that and other programs. So I would hope to have a special meeting in July. We'll send you some dates for a special meeting, since I have a deadline. I'd like to take this to the EU Commission in July, and then council in the end of July, so we have our decision made by September 1st deadline. So we'll just bring our recommendation to the commission and the council and get your feedback and input on that. And that's it.
Thank you. Any future agenda item requests from the commissioners? Seeing none, We move on to item D, adjourn. Thank you.